Good afternoon and welcome to True Crime Mysteries. If you're new to the channel, hello and welcome, and if you're returning, welcome back. Today we are discussing 3 cold cases that were solved with the help of volunteer genealogists. Let's get into it. Number 1. Marise Ann Chiverella. It was March 8, 1964 in Hazleton, Pennsylvania, when 9-year-old Marise Ann Chiverella left her home for school. She had left a little earlier than normal that day. She had a collection of canned goods to bring to her teacher. Ordinarily, Marise's siblings walked with her to school, but because she wanted to leave early, she was by herself. The school was less than a mile from her home, and it was a tight-knit community, so there weren't any concerns. Marise was last seen around 8 a.m. by a neighbor. At that point, she was almost halfway to school, but she never arrived. Every day, Marise came home for lunch, and her mother became concerned when she didn't that day. She called the school and discovered that Marise had been marked absent that morning. The police were called and a search began soon after. By 1 p.m., a report came in that the body of a little girl had been found in a nearby waste coal pit, 2 miles from where Marise was last seen, and it was quickly determined to be the missing girl. Her clothing, belongings, and the bag of canned goods were all found in the same area, but investigators had little evidence to work with. Her cause of death had been strangulation. No one could fathom that someone within the community had committed this heinous murder. Unfortunately, there hadn't been any witnesses to the abduction, or when the body had been dumped, and despite best efforts, the case went cold. Over the years, the Pennsylvania State Police would reopen and reinvestigate the case. A DNA profile was developed in 2007 from a sample of fluid discovered on Marise's jacket. The profile was uploaded to CODIS, but nothing came up. Since 2007, the DNA had been checked monthly against all new entries in both state and federal databases, but it never yielded any results. In 2019, Parabon Nanolabs constructed a composite image of what the suspect might have looked like based on his DNA. They concluded that the suspect was fair-skinned male with green or hazel eyes and brown hair. In 2020, 18-year-old Eric Schubert, a history major at Elizabethtown College in Pennsylvania, heard about the case and reached out to the Penn State Police and volunteered his genealogy expertise to help identify a suspect. Much to Schubert's surprise, they accepted his offer and he started a 2-year process of reverse engineering a family tree of the unknown suspect.
Next speaker is Mr. Eric Schubert from ES Genealogy. Mr. Schubert sent me an email years ago asking if he could work on our case. For the Pennsylvania State Police, that's a little outside the box. This decision paid off. Mr. Schubert provided a service that we would have never expected, and he reached out to us. We are proud to have him here, and I'm proud to introduce him to come up and speak next, Mr. Eric Schubert.
Thank you, Trooper Pruzynski, for the very, very kind words. As was said, my name is Eric Schubert of ES Genealogy. I was the independent consultant brought on through the District Attorney's Office to conduct a genealogy investigation into this case. Just a little bit about my background. My work with genealogy stretches back over 10 years and has been featured nationally. I've assisted in several other cold cases throughout the country over the past 2 years. And as was mentioned, I've been involved in this investigation for about 2 years. So it's certainly something that I've been working on a very long time, and it means a lot to me, as I know it does to so many people here. It really was a multifaceted investigation that left absolutely no stone unturned. At the beginning, as was mentioned, the highest DNA match to Marise's assailant in public DNA databases was about 53 centimorgans. And a centimorgan is, think of it like a unit of measurement for a genetic linkage. You share a set amount of centimorgans with everyone in your family. And 53 is very, very low, as was mentioned. But that was where we started. From there, I conducted traditional family tree research using census records, military records, newspaper records, and more. So we were really zeroing in on families, locations, links, And it took a year, but we were able to go from 53 centimorgans to almost 200, which now is really something that I can work with. It was the strongest and most important lead that we had to date. I'll never forget when Corporal Barron was telling me that we had just gotten that match, because in that moment I knew that we were going to find the assailant. We quickly worked our way up from that match to a match that in the end was over 1,000 centimorgans. It was about 1,200. That's something that you would share with a person who's a half uncle, a cousin, that sort of thing. So to go from 53 to 179 to 1,200 took 2 years. And at the end of the day, those matches allowed me to identify the assailant for the state police. So that is a bit of background on the specifics on how this team did it. And on a personal note, I really would like to say that the investigation that went into all of this work was probably the hardest genealogy task that I've ever faced in over 10 years, as long as I've been doing genealogy. I would dare to say that this was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life. And it means so much to me that I was able to be on the team that could provide answers for the Chiverella family, and to, of course, help out the state police to close this investigation. With that being said, there's so many people that I want to thank. I'm sure I'm going to miss some people. Words can't express my appreciation for Corporal Mark Barron, who is absolutely indispensable in his role as lead investigator on the case. I especially want to thank Trooper Q Rose, Sergeant Stefanik, Trooper Pruzynski for not thinking my email was crazy and actually taking me up on it. And especially retired corporal and former DA's office detective Sean Williams for everything they did to assist in solving this case. And like I said, there's so many people who worked on this, so that's just a snippet. But this was really something that is going to stick with me for a very long time, and everyone's work in this was absolutely invaluable to finding James Paul Ford. Their dedication, their advocacy, their support, and contributions were really invaluable to this investigation. And like I said, they all played really vital roles. I was 18 years old when I started working on this case. Now I'm almost 21, so this is something that I've been working on this for a very long time, to say the least. So it's certainly something that I know is going to stick with me because I spent so much time on it. I've been working on it practically my entire undergraduate career so far in college. So the people on this team mean a lot to me. They put so much into it. We worked as a team, and we, in the end, found the answers that everyone was looking for. And like I said, today I especially want to say that my thoughts are with the Chiverellas, especially Marise's great siblings who I've gotten to know very well over the past 2 years. They've waited so long to have this answer. I, of course, can't put myself in their shoes, but I know how hard this is. And I really want to say that I appreciate all their kind words and support, and it's been great getting to know them. Their words always mean a lot, and it was really important to me that they know how hard this team was working over these past 2 years to find James Paul Ford. It really is a big honor to have assisted, and yes, thank you so much.
On January 6, 2022, after 58 years, there was finally a solid lead and a deceased suspect was being exhumed. And on February 3rd, they received the test results that confirmed the match. James Paul Forte had died in 1980 at 38, and he had never married nor had children, which was why the exhumation for comparison was necessary.
The cold case has been cracked. Police say DNA samples prove James Paul Ford raped and murdered little Marisa.
This is an exact match.
Cops found Marisa's body near the Hazleton airport. They investigated for decades, even running the killer's DNA through databases every month for the last 15 years. It wasn't until genealogist Eric Schubert teamed up with state police. DNA and genealogy tracing led to a distant family member who was a match. Their DNA samples led investigators to Ford. He's been dead since 1980, but police obtained a DNA sample from his remains. It came back a match last week.
This was probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my entire life.
Marise's siblings, now in their 60s and 70s, are remembering their little sister. She went to school at what's now called Holy Family Academy. Marise is resting at the St. Joseph Cemetery.
When Marise had been murdered in 1964, Forte had been 22 years old. He had been a long-time Hazleton resident, living only 6 blocks from the Chiverella family, but hadn't been known to them. Forte had a history of violence. He had been charged with aggravated assault and sexual assault. The victim that had survived the attack in 1974 said that she knew that he was going to kill her, but a passerby saved her life. He didn't go to prison for that attack, but was instead released on probation. Forte had never been a suspect prior to his identification. Unfortunately, Mr. Forte is not alive for us to prosecute. However, he is the person that committed this crime. Mark Barron, the lead investigator, said in a statement, Marise's 4 siblings stood together at the press conference announcing the closure of the case. They made this statement for their sister.
She was a wonderful sister. She was 9 years old at the time. We watched her grow just like we watched each other grow. As a siblings, we relied heavily on the compassion and the direction of our parents. We come from good roots. Hopefully we continue to carry on the examples and the morals that our parents had portrayed to us. Our mother reached a point over a number of years where she, I forget, not sure the conditions, but she told us all that she forgave the man that murdered her daughter. Okay.
Number 2, Mary Silvani. It was on July 17, 1982, when a horrific discovery was made in a meadow near Lake Tahoe. A woman had been found shot to death near a popular hiking trail. The woman dressed in shorts and a t-shirt and was wearing a bathing suit underneath for what was likely supposed to be a day at the beach. She had no identification on her, and officers published multiple notices in local papers hoping to identify her. They estimated her age to be somewhere between 25 and 35. She was 5'5", petite frame, brown or hazel eyes, with brown hair worn in a bun. They also noted that she had given birth and had a vaccination scar on her left arm. There were no missing person reports that matched her description, and she was given the name Sheep Flat Jane Doe for the location she was found in. There wasn't a lot of evidence for investigators to go on. They had what they believed was a set of footprints from the killer, as well as DNA left at the crime scene. Doubly challenged with the task of finding not only the killer but also identifying the victim, the case went cold. The case was reopened and re-examined for new leads by the Washoe County Sheriff's Office every few years, doing several different variations of facial reconstructions and publishing it to try and find someone who knew a woman that had gone missing in the summer of '82. In 2018, investigators reached out to Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick, co-founder of the DNA Doe Project and founder of Identifiers International, to help in the case. They took on the case and for the first time used genetic genealogy to identify the victim and the perpetrator in a cold case. More than a dozen volunteers first worked to identify the victim. The volunteers ranged from students to grandmothers, some with former experience in law enforcement, but most just had a passion for genealogy. They first uploaded the victim's DNA to GEDmatch and broke up into small groups. Each group would tackle distant relatives and piece together family trees until they found relatives that shared more DNA, indicating that they were closer relatives. Eventually, they identified a distant cousin, and after 36 years, they were finally able to identify Jane Doe. Her name was Marise Ann Silvani. She had been born in Pontiac, Michigan in 1948. Her father had died while she was in high school, and her mother had left the family years before that. She had 2 brothers, and when she finished high school, all 3 siblings moved to California. Mary had never been reported missing, and she was 33 at the time of her death. Investigators also determined that she didn't have any children connected to her. records-wise, leaving them to believe that she may have given up a child for adoption at some point during her life. Once Mary was identified, Dr. Fitzpatrick's team turned their attention to her killer. Using the same process and 2,000 hours of work led to another potential match, James Richard Curry. They learned that Curry had killed himself in 1987 while in police custody for murdering 3 people in San Jose, California. 5 months after Mary had been murdered, Curry had been arrested for the murder of 2 people he knew, a husband and wife that were neighbors. He confessed to officers and directed them to a storage unit he rented. They went there and discovered the body of a 3rd victim that had been a missing person for a year, and further evidence in the storage unit indicated he was connected to a co-worker that had gone missing from Joaquina, California. Her remains were never found. Curry died days after his arrest. He committed suicide while awaiting a sentencing hearing. He was 37 years old. All of Curry's previous victims that are known were people he knew. His family stated that Curry was familiar with Lake Tahoe and went there often, but they weren't sure if his paths had ever crossed with Mary. Investigators do believe that more cases may be connected to Curry in the future. Number 3. Helene Pruzynski. On January 16, 1980, Helene Pruzynski, a 21-year-old Wheaton College student, got off the bus at her Englewood stop. She was 2 weeks into a new internship with the news department at the KHOW radio station. She was an aspiring journalist, and this internship was the first step in her new career. She was a dedicated student and one of the first students to be accepted into this particular internship. She had recently moved to Denver, Colorado, and was living with family. From her bus stop, it was only a 6-block walk to her aunt and uncle's house, but Helene never made it there. She usually left the radio station at around 6 p.m. She had followed the same routine every day since she'd started her internship. When she didn't arrive home at her usual time, her aunt and uncle called the police, but learned that a young woman not arriving home for supper was a low priority to the Denver Police Department. They accepted a photograph of Helene. On the back they wrote a brief description of the young woman and what she'd been wearing that day before sending them on their way. They instructed them to call back later, assuring them that she would turn up that evening. Her aunt and uncle worried all night. They had gone out several times, driving around and walking the nearby neighborhoods.
Ms. Pruzynski's body was found early Thursday. She'd been sexually assaulted and stabbed. A college student working as an intern in the news department at KHOW Radio, she was last seen Wednesday afternoon when she left work.
Englewood police, also in on the case, have been concentrating their efforts near this bus stop on South Broadway. It's believed that Ms. Pruzynski got off her bus after work here Wednesday night. She was abducted sometime after that. They've been talking with people in the area looking for some clue, but so far nothing. And they're afraid if they don't find something soon, they may not find anything at all.
The following morning at 9 a.m., a body was discovered by a woman taking her son to school. The woman pulled over and got a closer look, confirming her suspicions. Officers were called and had been able to identify the young woman quickly. It was Helene. She had been dumped in a field and was naked from the waist down. Her hands were bound behind her back, and she'd been stabbed 9 times. They canvassed the area and found a woman who claimed to have witnessed a man near the field. Though it had been dark, she said that she'd been able to get a good look at his face. She agreed to go under hypnosis, and she gave the police sketch artist enough details to recreate a composite image. Investigators had been confident they would be able to find Helene's killer quickly. At the crime scene, they discovered a fresh footprint near Helene's body. Its distinct shape led investigators to believe their suspect was wearing cowboy boots. They also took measurements and had their suspect's shoe size. Investigators had a sketch, a witness, and they were sure that someone had seen the abduction at the bus stop. With a vehicle make and model, surely they would have enough to find a suspect. But despite a significant amount of evidence, there were no arrests made. After a year without any progress, the case was officially cold. In the spring of 2019, Paul Holes and Billy Jensen started a podcast called The Murder Squad. They used their collective fame to shine a light on old cold cases in hopes of gaining new leads. In their podcast, they encourage listeners to take DNA tests and upload the DNA into GEDmatch databases. One woman did just that. She just thought it would be an easy way to potentially help solve cold cases. She got a kit from 23andMe and submitted her results into GEDmatch. She didn't think anything would come of it, but only a few weeks later she received a call from law enforcement. Her DNA linked a relative to a crime in 1980, a third cousin. Law enforcement worked with genealogists to help piece her extended family tree together. It was a slow process made more difficult by a complicated family tree. 2 years later, they found a strong maternal match. The woman had used 6 last names in her life, had 5 children with 2 different men, and most of her children were in the care of others. There was one son who most closely matched their suspect in age and lived in the area at the time. Curtis Allen White was in the care of his father as an infant, but was raised by an aunt and uncle until he was a teenager. He was a frequent runaway and was in and out of foster care. He also had a brother with a lengthy criminal history, and detectives worked to obtain genetic material from both men. His brother was cleared as a suspect. This left only Curtis Allen White, who would change his name to James Curtis Clanton in 1982, 2 years after Helene's murder. James Curtis Clanton lived in Denver in 1980, where he was on parole for a violent assault in Arkansas. In 1975, he had pleaded guilty to entering a woman's home and assaulting her. He had been sentenced to 30 years in prison, but had only served 4 before making parole. He was released in 1979 before CODIS, before sex offender registrations, and he'd never been a suspect in Helene's murder case. He married for the first time in 1980, and his first wife left him in 30 days. In 1982, he changed his name, moved to Florida, and had another short marriage. He was arrested on domestic violence charges in 1998, and then again in 2001. Clanton had never been a suspect until his genetic profile came under the purview of detectives decades later. He went on to live a normal life. He was still living in Florida at the time of his arrest. He was a trucker and had children. After his arrest in 2001, he didn't seem to have any more issues with law enforcement. Detectives located him in the Lake Butler area, where they spent a week following him, waiting for him to leave an object behind containing his DNA. Finally, on November 30th, Clanton left a beer mug behind in the bar, and police were able to take it and get a DNA sample. They tested the beer mug DNA to the sample from the unknown suspect, and they were able to match the 2 samples. Clanton was arrested while exiting his truck and charged with first-degree murder and second-degree kidnapping. He was extradited from Florida to Colorado. Nearly 40 years after Helene was murdered, her murderer would face justice. He would not be charged with a rape due to statute of limitations being expired, and police also said they wouldn't pursue an investigation to determine if Clanton was also connected to other assaults in the area, since the statutes of limitations had run out on those cases as well. Clanton pleaded guilty, and he was sentenced in July 2020 to a life sentence. He can apply for parole in 2040, and he will be 82 by then.
When you first grabbed Helene, was it right when she stepped off the bus? Was it when she was walking down the street?
She probably walked down the sidewalk and half a block, maybe a block. She was walking down the sidewalk.
Where were you? Were you behind her, in front of her?
I think I went up to the next block, turned left, and parked beside the street.
Okay, and then so when you came up behind her, you just put your arm around. Did you put your arm around her shoulder? Or did you put your arm around her?
Around her waist, and I had the knife palmed in my hand and pointing toward her.
Okay. What kind of knife was it? Was it a pocket knife, buck knife?
It was kind of like a hunting knife.
You know how long it was?
The blade was probably 5 or 6 inches.
Okay. And did you have that just for the rape, or was that something that you normally had on you?
I didn't normally ever carry a knife. I think this knife was in Daryl's garage, and I picked it up and took it with me.
Specifically for this?
Yes.
Helene's older sister, Janet Johnson, thanked detectives, saying, "The detectives and everyone else who helped make this day happen are my heroes." And also said after Clanton's sentencing hearing, "It gives me some peace knowing that this beast is in jail, but I don't think we will ever have closure because Helene is not here, and that void will remain with us forever. She was just a special woman whose life was taken way too soon. All 3 of these cases would not have been solved without the help of people donating thousands of hours of time to do this type of work. Many law enforcement agencies don't have the budget to invest in the man-hours needed to identify unknown persons with genetic genealogy. It is incredible work that has truly changed how cold cases are solved. Well, that is it for this video. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you like this content and what I do over here, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss my next upload. And if you could give a like if you enjoyed this content, that would be much appreciated. We also have channel membership as well as Patreon if you want to get more behind the scenes content as well as exclusive content, or just to support the channel. In the description box of this video, you will also find all my socials linked to connect with me as well as other goodies. But that is it for me. Thank you so much for being here. I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.